What's good, y'all? Solomon here. I hope you're having a great day. Before we get into today's Hippopotamus Defense video, I wanted to mention that I'm giving out a 30% off discount code for both of my online courses, including the Hippopotamus Defense. Okay, if you're interested in that 30% off sale, all you got to do is go down to the description below or the pinned comment. You will see the link there. Click on that link and plug in the discount code June 2024, and you will receive 30% off on the course. Okay, hundreds have gotten it. Many have told me that they have enjoyed it, and I'm not selling something I don't believe in. Okay, I really do believe in the Hippopotamus Defense as a very underrated, very strong weapon for white or black, either side. And I've used it exclusively as white and black to reach the National Master title in OTB tournament play. I beat GMs, IMs, and quite a few high-level players with it. And I don't say that to brag, but more to say that I really do think the Hippo works. There's a ton of benefits behind playing it. I think one of them is you're just taking your opponent out of their theory. I don't care what you play. If you play, let's say I'm playing as black. If you play the King's Indian attack, if you play the Danish gambit, if you play the Vienna game, it doesn't matter. Because when I play the Hippo, all that theory goes out the window. Okay, and your opponent's going to sit there and probably be kind of looking around like, what on earth's happening? I've never seen this in my life. You, on the other hand, you play it every game and you're growing in your comfortability. So yeah, I mean, I could keep going on why I think the Hippo is so strong. Again, I've been playing it exclusively as both colors and have been enjoying it a ton and getting pretty good results with it. So one other thing I do want to mention before getting into the video is that this course is not just for advanced Hippo players. Okay, it takes you from not knowing what the heck the Hippo is to a pretty strong level of mastery. That's the goal, right? So this is not like, oh, if you don't know X, Y, and Z, you can't get the course. I start at 0 and I build my way up from there. All that to say, if you do get the course, I hope you enjoy it, and I'll see y'all over in the main video. Let's get it. For today's video, I picked out 5 games that I've played online against international master players, or IMs, and all of these games I ended up getting the win with the Hippopotamus Defense. And yeah, I hope that you enjoy it. And all of these 5 games, we're going to start out with the breather moment, which is when we already have our Hippo setup or are close to it and decide to either change things up a little bit, or if we reach that full thick-skinned Hippo, then it's a matter of, okay, which of the 4 middle game plans are we leaning and going towards? Okay, or are we going to wait on that and play some more waiting moves or just slow improving moves? By the way, these games, even though they're all wins against international master players with the Hippo, these games are not perfect. Okay, and in each game, I want to show you guys not just the good moves that I made, but the bad moves as well. I think a lot of players, at least myself, when I was growing up, skipped right to the greatest games of all time, right? Now, I'm not sitting here saying that any of my games are the greatest of all time, but what I am saying is that it's easy to try to show the best game that you've played or that someone else has played and used it in an instructive manner, right? I mean, if we think about Gary Kasparov, what's his immortal game? What's Karpov's immortal game? What's the best game Vishy and And ever played? That's a lot of fun, right? And there is something to say about seeing the best players of all time do what they do. But I also think that there's something to say for seeing what you should not do, seeing mistakes. If you play the Hippopotamus Defense, I encourage you, look at games where the Hippo loses. See where the Hippo player went wrong. If you play the Danish Gambit, if you play the Sicilian Defense, no matter what you're doing, don't just look at wins, but look at losses as well. And even in those wins, there's going to be mistakes. So make sure to try to find those as well. Here we go. Game 1. Yeah, I'm going up against an IM with the rating of 2198 online. And here we have the breather moment, right? We got our full thick-skinned Hippo, or pretty close to it. I mean, we could play this move of A6, but it's pretty pointless because what's the point of A6? To play B5 or to be prepared to play B5 against A5. Both of these, they're just not possible because of the pawn on C4. So when I see a pawn on C4, I hardly ever play A6 unless I'm wanting to play C5 and I don't want to deal with knight B5. But in this case, I ended up playing the move of F5. Actually, turns out that G5 works here. Is this with tempo? No. However, if white plays H4 going after that pawn, we have to ask ourselves a question, and really we got to ask ourselves this question before we play G5. How many defenders are on this pawn? Well, in this case, there's only 2. Right? And if you play H4, we get rid of one of them. Now you only have one defender. This idea doesn't work if there's a pawn on C3 or if this bishop, let's say it's back here or something, right? Because then they'd have more defenders. But in this case, there's only one defender. So we can play knight C6 attacking this pawn twice, going towards that pawn on h4. And yeah, I mean, if you want to kick our knight around, that's fine. We can play knight c e5. Now we're defending the pawn on g4. We're still threatening your pawn. And yeah, if you want to take, we can take back. Something like f4 doesn't really work. We use the role en passant, queen e7. And even if white goes crazy here on the queen side, the engine likes us castling queen side, playing a move like knight c5. And yeah, I mean, nearly a -2 advantage for black here. Two very active minor pieces. All three of these guys are under a lot of pressure. The bishop's attacked twice. The pawn on c4 is attacked. The pawn on e4 is attacked twice as well. And yeah, we just have two bishops slicing and dicing. In terms of activity, I think our bishops are better than theirs, and I think our knights are better than theirs. On top of that, our pawn structure is much more solid, right? And yeah, I mean, even though white here can try to break things up at some point, we have a G file, we have a queen aimed towards h4. There's a lot that could happen here, and yeah, I just think black's better. So g5 here is probably what I would have went with if I had to do it again, but I played this move of f5, and after e takes, I took back with a knight. Now, most of the time, if your opponent captures and there's no pawn on e5 or g5, usually that means knight takes f5 is the best move. Okay, now, yeah, I mean, in this case, the knight is attacking d4, e3, right? Very active minor piece. My opponent here decides to capture it, and I ended up taking with the g pawn, okay? E takes f5 works, but I've had multiple games where my opponent will play something like d5 and start to look towards that e6 square as well as c6, and it can be a headache. So, you know, notice, by the way, e6 for the rest of this game, no pawn can defend that square. So this is a little bit hard to deal with. Instead, I play that move of g takes. Here I end up castling kingside. Knight f6, just trying to improve, and here I throw the knight right in. If white decides to take, okay, I'll take back with my pawn. And now you have two minor pieces attacked. White here is simply losing a piece for a pawn. And yeah, it's just not good. So knight e4 is played. Of course, my opponent doesn't fall for that. We see the move of knight d2. I ended up playing queen f6, just trying to add more pressure, more tension. And I'm eyeing up that pawn on d4. If I did decide to take on d4 right away, notice that h6 would fall, right? So white here would probably decide to take on e4 and then decide to take on h6. So my bishop at the moment, right, after knight e4, the knight moves, my bishop needs to stay here, right? It needs to stay here to cover h6. Of course, when my king moves, then the bishop is a little bit more freed to kind of move around and be more active. But at this point in the game, okay, I play queen f6, just trying to activate my pieces. And after captures, I have f takes. Now I have a battery ram on the f file, and I have a battery ram from h8 to a1, okay? Active position here. Bishop e3 is played, saving the bishop, saving the pawn. I continue with queen g6, just trying to eye up that king a little bit. And we now have king h1. Okay, this king trying to get out of dodge, just trying to get off the line of that queen. And now I play the crazy move of rook f3. Now, is this a mistake? No. In terms of it's still better for black. I think if I had, you know, if this was a longer game and I had more time, I'd probably just play something like rook f7 and double up the rooks, or maybe king h7. Just keep slowly adding the pressure here and the tension. I mean, white here's going to have a very hard time developing or doing anything of substance. The pawn on d4 is pinned down by our bishop. The pawn on e4 is defended twice. If you play f3, we have a ton of pressure coming down on that pawn and the king now. White here's in some trouble, but I ended up playing rook f3. Now, white should have just move the queen or something. And in that case, okay, I guess I'll go back and just continue with the normal game plan. My opponent decides to take the rook, and this is simply losing, right? I play this move, e takes f3, and my opponent resigns because your queen's attacked, and I'm threatening mate. And if you play rook g1, thinking that, oh, you take my queen, I take yours, we have a check. We have a check. That's it. Okay, so, and by the way, after rook f3, this move of knight takes e4 is interesting, but in this case, we can take with the queen so that we really have that rook supported. You can take the rook, and yeah, you are up 2 points in material as you are up the exchange. However, notice how awkward this king feels. Our main objective is to get this rook to g8 as fast as we possibly can. We can play a move here like king f7, rook g8, c5, start to break stuff open. We're going to take on d4 next. You can't really defend it without losing your rook, or at least, you know, putting your rook in danger there. even then, I mean, I think even something like bishop f6, just continuing to add the pressure here can be very good. But following c5, notice he can't take the pawn because, yeah, I mean, bishop e5 would check. You can block with the bishop if you want, but at some point you're going to have to play king h3, and we have ourselves a ball game. Okay, so just wanted to take a look at this game real quick and just kind of show how the Hippo, it might start slow, right? Because the first 10 moves, we're not trying to win the game. It's very rare that 10 moves into a game I have a winning position, but it is very common that I have a playable position, one that I'm more comfortable with than my opponent, and that's what we saw in this game. Going back, another quick idea to just reference, usually I don't play g5 if it's not with tempo. However, if this pawn only has one defender, this actually could work, because if you attack the pawn, we kick the knight, we go here, we're threatening one pawn, we're threatening two. You can't stop both unless you play that move of d5, kicking our knight. But even here, I mean, this is just a great position for black. h4 is attacked. If you want to play something like g3, there's a number of options we have. One of them is taking off the bishop. One of them is playing knight f3 with check. We could take on d5. A lot of options here, but I don't think white is feeling too happy in a position like this. So yeah, again, the Hippo, very strong. Just keep those middle game ideas in mind when you're processing that breather moment. What do you do in a position like that? This next game, I'm playing against a 2380 online. As you can see, I kicked that bishop back to g6, and here I ended up tucking my knight. Now, I do think that this is a slight mistake, partly due to the fact that white could play e4, and I think practically a position like this is hard to play, in my opinion. Okay, I'm a little bit hesitant to tuck that knight when there's a bishop here. And of course, it's a speed chess game, and I've only used 13 seconds in the first 11 moves, so I haven't thought too much. But I would say in a longer format, I'd probably be a little bit worried about e4 just because the bishop's attacking my knight. It's not really a great idea for white to just start running away because there's a ton of pressure on d3. And if we take the pawn, which is the engine move, black here can take our knight. They can play a move like rook e8. Notice if we take the pawn, something like knight takes, I mean, a lot of pressure on e3. And if we castle, the knight captures on e4. For the rest of this game, no pawn can defend or attack any piece or square concerning e4, right? So this knight is planted. If we take the knight, they take back. Here we should play a move like queen d4, threaten and mate in one. And according to the engine, I mean, it's minus 0.3, 0.4 range, maybe 0.5. So it's an advantage for black. It's an edge. Is it winning? No. However, I personally don't like this position at all for white. Doesn't feel fun. Black stops it. We could lift the rook up to f2 if we want to, or do something like that. But it just feels like this bishop is not going anywhere, and it's really not. So all I have to say, be wary, be cautious of e4 ideas attacking your knight. Now, of course, there's a lot of ways black could mess this up. We went over the move of rook e8. I think most players would probably just go, you know what, let me take that pawn. But in this case, we take. And if you take with the bishop, we can still threaten mate. I mean, take that bishop. We're cool with that. We're cool with that. And if you defend the bishop, we take. You can't take with the knight, or else you get mated. And after d takes, now this is a whole different ballgame. This outpost is not filled with a piece. A minor or a major piece. By the way, minor piece, what do I mean by that? A bishop or a knight. A major piece is a rook or a queen. In this case, there's a pawn. So there was a great outpost here that black could have taken advantage of, but now they just have a pawn there. So this position actually feels better for white to me. If we want to, we could play a move like castling queenside. Very active diagonal here. G5 ideas on the way at some point. 2 battery rams again. And sure, both sides have isolated pawns, but I mean, yeah, they're both somewhat weak, but I think it's kind of a trade-off kind of thing. So, yeah. So knight g3 was played. Again, probably be a little bit wary of a move like e4. But, knight g3 is playable. I also think that castling kingside is a good move here, just to take it slow. Just to take it slow a little bit and figure out what we're doing. But I play the move knight g3, and we now see a5. In this case, I think h4 would have been a good option. I instead play a4, just trying to slow down that pawn. And here I continue with g5. Now, I've won multiple games with this against titled players. Okay, so this is not a trap that's just going to work if you're rated 500. I'm rated at the moment. I think I've been hovering around high 23s, low to mid 2400s in blitz. I've won multiple games like this, and I won a game like this in my over-the-board tournament, which helped me earn the National Master title by playing nothing but the Hippopotamus Defense, and I simply had a one game. However, in a position like this, my opponent missed the idea of e4. Again, this bishop attacking the knight, and two pieces attacking the pawn, and the rook looking towards my king. Are we losing here? No. The position's dead even. But yeah, I mean, white does have to be careful. I think what we should do here is take the pawn on e4. If black decides to capture our knight, let's take their knight as well. Yeah, I mean, if you want to take the pawn, we'll take your bishop. If you move the bishop, here's a position where we can take that pawn on g7. And if you take something on e4, we could play knight c4. We are up 1 point in material at the moment, as we are up a pawn. The engine gives it a dead even evaluation, which is interesting to me. I personally like white a lot here. I mean, I would much rather have white. I mean, goodness, that pawn on g7 is just annoying for black. A lot of advanced pawns, a lot of holes that we could kind of jump into and take advantage of. Of course, it's not an easy position to play because we have weaknesses as well, but I definitely think that white is a lot better. And by the way, if queen g5, let's match that energy, offer a trade. If you want to trade, that's cool. I mean, we'll take back. Once the bishop runs, we can castle queenside. We're attacking your knight on g7. We're putting pressure on your bishop. Knight d6 ideas are in the air. g5 ideas are in the air. You know, let's just say something like knight e5, for example. We could play g5, trying to distract that bishop from the knight. But yeah, I mean, after e4, I do think taking the knight right away is a big mistake. So I would stay away from that because after captures, there's pressure on the knight, pressure on the pawn. So this pawn is overworked right now. It has too big of a job. It can't defend both. On top of that, we have a pawn and a bishop aimed towards c2. Here's where we just got to get out of there and let black take this pawn. And then they're going to take this pawn. So they're going to get 3 pawns for the piece. So we're going to be even in material. I don't like it for white. But even worse is taking the pawn on g7 because of the fact that this file is opened. We didn't take. We should have took. So black couldn't just break everything open. But now black plays a move like bishop takes. Rook takes e3 check is an idea now because you can't take back. Just something to be aware of at the very least. And if we take the bishop, which is the best move, rook takes e3. They take a pawn. Queen c7. I mean, this. Yeah, I'm just gonna sit here and let you guys think about this one, but that's not good. So g5 was played, and there's times where a move like e4 there doesn't work. I mean, I've had multiple games where I play g5 and I'm just winning. A lot has to line up there for black. They have to have a rook against our king. The bishop has to attack here. There has to be a bishop on g6. So much has to add up. But this is a common idea in the Hippo. Play g4, tuck the knight. Now this knight has nowhere to go safely. Okay, and my opponent here decides to play d4. I lock it up with e4. Very next move, I take the knight. Now I continue with queen f3. I'm up in material. Let's trade, right? If you have a fight of 100 people against 99 people or 2 people against 1, the 2-on-1 is going to have a better chance because even though the difference is the same, the percentage is different. Here we got to trade off, trade into a simply winning endgame. Let's say black denies it. We could play h4 with tempo, play h5. Now this bishop is trapped, and that's what happened in the game. I continued by taking off this bishop, playing queen f5. Now the queen has to get traded off. I end up taking it, playing bishop h3, continuing with bishop g4. And I mean, here we're just +4 in the position, right? I mean, we're just simply better here. We're up 2 pieces. Of course, we're down 2 pawns, but I mean, 2 minor pieces for 2 pawns. Obviously, we're taking the 2 minor pieces anytime. So not much of a reason to go over the rest of that game there. But yeah, I just wanted to mention that idea of, playing that move of g5 once you tuck your knight, because this knight has nowhere to go. Rook e8 was a big mistake, but it is very common. I've seen titled players do it all the time. But also be aware of e4. And oftentimes black doesn't have all of this kind of stuff going on at once. But sometimes they do. So if they do, just be cautious of that. Now here in this game, I had 9 seconds on the clock used, right, within the first 10 moves. So I'm obviously playing pretty quickly here. I played the move of g4. Not a blunder, not the best either. I mean, it could work out, and in this game it did. I just think there could be some potential concerns. A more slow approach like castling kingside could be a good idea here, but I instead played g4. Now the potential issue with this is that black could play bishop d6, which is what they do. And now my dark squares feel a little bit weak. I ended up castling kingside, and We see the move e5. By the way, if h5 was played, we don't have to be worried about that right now because we have g5 kicking the knight, h4. And if f6, really going after that pawn, knight d4, we're threatening 2 pawns. You can't save both. White there with a great game. So we see the move e5. Now here I play the move of f4. I usually tuck the knight, so I don't really know what I was thinking here. Again, not using much time on the clock, but f4 is played. The reason that this is a mistake, and again, guys, I'm not even in these wins against international masters. I'm not trying to sit here and tell you I'm perfect and that I play flawless chess. That's a mistake because of the fact that we could see this move of queen b6. Right? We got to be aware that in terms of the geometry of the hippo, these 2 pawns don't have any pieces supporting them. The knights don't support them in any way. The bishops don't support them. So we got to be careful when pushing our flank pawns, right? Pushing to c4 would be a mistake because pawn on t3 would fall. Pushing to f4 in this case would be a mistake because the queen can access. Now, it's a whole different story if the pawn's back and the knight's here because queens can't jump, as we know. But in this case, I would probably play d4. And after e takes, we could take back with our pawn side by side, wiping out half of the 5th rank. But after rook a8, I don't know. I don't like this position for white. Doesn't feel like we can push very hard without making more weaknesses. And e4 is already a gapping hole as well as e3. Feels like our king side's a little bit overextended without the infrastructure to support it. So f4 is played again. I think if I had to do that again, I'd probably play knight g3, right? Just take it a little bit slower there. But all right, f4 is played. Queen e7. I ended up playing f5, trying to lock things down. Now play e4. Love this kind of pawn structure for white. An arrow going all the way down to f5. And once we see b5, I continue with knight g3. I've got this position all the time as white or black. Like, you know, locked up position. Kind of feels like a Vienna game or a Vienna gambit with a pawn on f5. Kind of feels like a Grand Prix attack. I almost said Gecko Piano. I don't know why, but it almost feels like a Grand Prix attack in some senses. What are we going to do now? Just keep slowly building up our attack. Is there much that black can do to stop it much of the time? No. In this case, b4 was played. I ended up locking it up, right? From a practical standpoint, I want this side to be locked up. I want this side to be locked up. I want this side of the board, since I'm attacking on this side, to really open up towards the enemy king. Of course, I'm not going to be in a rush doing that. Let's play queen e2. Let's play rook a e1. I'm not in a rush here. I'm just trying to improve my pieces every move. I'm not trying to win this game in 5 moves. But every move, I'm thinking, what piece of mine is not the best, and how can I activate it? Like in this position, for example, what pieces for white are well placed, and what pieces aren't? Now, this bishop on g2, some might argue that this is not the best, and at the moment, it's not. But I would say that this bishop is holding things together pretty well. I wouldn't consider this bishop terrible by any means. In fact, later on in the game, as you'll see, a very common idea is h4 and bishop h3, taking advantage of the following diagonal. Now, in this case, though, the bishop on b2, it's just not doing much. It's attacking a pawn on e5 that is defended 4 times. Okay, so, I mean, that bishop's not really posing much of a threat. In this case, I end up playing bishop c1, right? In any kind of fianchetto opening, if your bishop's not the most active, bring it back or bring it to a3, whatever. It's rare and it's hard for the opponent to stop any and all of these from being active. So usually you're going to have one of these that's active. Always feel free to maneuver that bishop around. Bishop c5 check is played. I move up my king to h2, queen d6, h4. Just continuing to slowly add the tension and the pressure. Notice you can't take on g4 because the queen defends it. And after takes, I could take with the pawn, but I think that this is a big mistake. Now, sure, a move like knight c4 could be possible. I still think that white's much better here, but this square on e4, why not take with a knight? Why not put pressure on the opponent? Why not support a move like g5 going forward? And if you take, which is what my opponent did, we can take back. The second you run, g5. g5 was played. I felt good about that move. Really putting pressure on h6. Once you take, I'm going to take back with my pawn. Now the h file is opened up, so I can really start to think about putting some pieces there. On top of that, these pawns are wiping out half of the 6th rank. It's going to be hard for black to deal with this. Knight f8 is played, and I continue with f6, just trying to break this position open like crazy. Notice, let's just say black played something like queen a7. They didn't, they took. But in this position, what's the weakness here for black? Well, the weakness is the h file. this king's in trouble. I mean, case closed. So let's play queen h5, start putting pressure on that bishop. I mean, we're looking at taking queen h6, knight f6 stuff. We're looking at potentially rook lifting, all that kind of good stuff. If g6, let's threaten mate. Now, you can stop it. That's fine. Now we got to ask what pieces of ours are not the most active. What pieces of ours can get more active? In this case, I think our rook on f1 can get more active here. Why not rook lift it? 1, and then start looking towards the second move. Now, if our queen's attacked, okay, that's fine. We'll drop back. In this case, we're going to play rook h3. Even if you play king g8, the rook's coming over, your bishop's done. And if you bring the bishop back out so that you can defend that light squared bishop, queen h6, this is simply going to be over. So after f6, we see the move of capturing on f6, but even after that, I mean, white here actually has a better position because the position is more opened up. Now we have 2 files up against the enemy king. And in terms of piece placement, white is much more prepared to start throwing pieces over there. Queen a7 is played. I continue with bishop h3. Love this idea in general, just, you know, activating a bishop, attacking the rook. They save it, queen h5. Here my opponent resigns. And honestly, this game's about to be over. I mean, there's not much the opponent can do to stop my attack. At the moment, I'm looking at queen h6, queen g7 ideas. Let's say you try to stop that. Bishop f5. If you go back, queen h6, right? I mean, after queen h5, I mean, we have a mate in 9 from this point. If black starts going crazy with taking and blah, blah, blah. But I mean, who's going to take here, right? I mean, this is just unstoppable. There's really no getting in the way of it. If you see a move like knight g6, the whole idea being that they want to bring the rook over or something like that, or their bishop, okay. What's the new target? Well, h7 is pretty weak. Let's play the move knight g5. Threatening a mate in 1. The second you stop it, yet again, queen h6 comes. Black here is simply losing. Okay, so want to include that game in kind of the slow burn approach to attacking with the Hippo. Here with our next Hippo game against an international master. Yeah, I mean, I almost have my full setup here. Usually h3 is played, but again, because there's this pawn on f5, h3 is just pointless because we're not going to be playing g4. Right? The only point of ever playing h3 would be to prevent knight g4 in the case of us playing f4. But also notice too, black structure is pretty irregular right now. I mean, usually in the Hippo, we're playing against a 2-pawn center with 2 knights out. Maybe we're playing against a 3-pawn center or even a 4-pawn center. You know, a 3-pawn center on the king side or the queen side. In this case, we have kind of a stonewall type setup, but there's nothing for the Hippo player to worry about. Okay, I think casting king side is a good move. c4 is also a good move, and that's what I went with. Just trying to gain some space. Gain some space on the queen side, put some pressure on the center. In the Hippo, we're not trying to win the game right away. We get that position, we get that structure, then we play slowly. Every move, we slowly add more pressure, more tension, and the result is oftentimes great attacking chess. If black decides to take the pawn, by the way, now their pawn structure is a little bit in shambles, we can take with the knight. Put some pressure on that bishop. Next move, make some more space. And notice b5, right? b5 here, trying to kick our knight around. Remember to always keep an eye out for our bishops and what they attack. In this case, bishop takes c6, attacking the rook. White here with a nice advantage. So c4 is played. Instead, we see the move queen e7. Notice by playing c4, this does give me the ability to play queen c2. So it gives me a little bit of breathing room for my queen. We see the move a5. I now play d4, advancing in the center. b6, I castle kingside. And here I go with the move of knight f4. Now this move isn't the only move that we had. You know, much like a lot of Hippo positions, there's a bunch of different moves here that work. Knight f4 is a good move. Knight f3. You know, moving one of our rooks here and trying to activate and just, you know, put some tension behind those pawns so that when things break open, the rooks are ready to go. In this case of knight f4, you know, black could take. They didn't take, but black could have. However, now we have a big decision to make. Which pawn do we take with? Usually in chess, we take towards the center. In this case, that would be a mistake because we'd be opening up the file against our king. And we'd also be making h4 a little bit weak as well. So at some point, black could try to, you know, make some tension over there. And on top of that, like, what do we get out of this? Why did we want to give up our knight just to get this bishop? And now we have kind of a weird doubled pawn thing going on. Of course, it kind of feels like stonewall versus stonewall. One advantage that we have is that e5 I mean, no black pawn can attack that, right? None of these pawns can do it. For the rest of this game, no pawn can defend that square, except this guy if we see some kind of capture. But on the other hand, we have f3 available. So that is one pro of taking with the pawn. But again, king side feels a little bit loose, feels a little bit weakened, and the g-file is open. Instead, e takes f4 is a much better option because we can very easily place a rook on e1 going after this backwards pawn. And again, e5 is a square that we could go after eventually, and f3 is always available to prevent or kick out a piece if something decides to jump in there. But in the game, we have the move knight e4. I just play f3 going, you know what, I don't like your knight there. I don't like the knight there. So now you have a choice. You can take the knight, you can run away. We see black run right back to where they were. In this case, I play knight d3, just rerouting the knight a little bit, eyeing some key dark squares, c5. A lot of tension here. I took away from the center. The engine didn't hate this move, but it didn't love it either. You know, the engine just wants more slow play, something like a4, something like rook ac1. Makes sense. In this case, I take away from the center just to activate that bishop. And here I continue by playing rook ae1. Rook fc8 is played. I end up capturing off that knight. And notice here, there's a pretty big threat. I mean, if we play something like h3 or just waste a move, by the way, I don't know why we would want to play that. It just weakens g3. But if we just make a move somewhere, we're about to lose a pawn. So we don't want to lose that pawn. So I end up playing the move of a4. Rook a1 as well. This just isn't a good way to defend it because we lose a pawn. I also wasn't big on queen c1. Just feels a little bit too passive. So I'll go, you know what? I'm going to play a4. Sure, b4 is now a hole, but so is b5. So I felt pretty okay in that kind of scenario. Bishop b4, I offer up a trade. Play f4, right? Play f4. Trying to make some space here, trying to eye that e5 square and give my knight some flexibility as well. Of course, rook a7 is played. Another option, or really idea behind f4 is the fact that, the black rook on a8 was targeted. So that's something that black has to think about. But all right, bishop takes f6 is played. I play rook c1, rook a c7. Black has an advantage here, right? Black does. I play queen d3. These bishops are menacing towards my pieces. A lot of pins, a lot of activity type ideas going on here. And after captures, I ended up taking with the b pawn. Now, bishop takes c4 works here. This is a pretty good move. In that case, I could play rook fe1. Interesting here. I think black here is going to be pushing for a win. White, on the other hand, is going to be trying to draw this kind of position. But instead, we have the move rook takes c4. Now, I understand the idea of taking with the rook twice to try to trade down because they're up material. But notice, too, I mean, the back rank is a little bit weakened, right? I play rook d1, and, you know, I'm eyeing squares like d7 and d8. And by the way, h6, trying to give escape score for the king, that's a mistake because it turns out the main idea behind this rook move wasn't just to look at that, but to look at bishop f1, attacking the rook. No matter where that rook moves, you know, discounting crazy moves like rook d4. I mean, let's say you take or something, thanks for the bishop. Now white is the one with the clear advantage, up 2 pawns for a piece. Instead, we have the move rook takes a4. This is simply a mistake. I play queen d7. I'm threatening taking the rook. I'm threatening queen e8, which forces queen f8, in which case I win another pawn. Rook a2 is played. I throw in the check. Queen goes back. I take the pawn. King h8 is what black should have played, but even after this, I mean, can't we just take the rook? Okay, we're just better here. Up a rook for a pawn. Instead, in the game, we have queen f7, and in that case, rook d8 is what I went with. Here we have checkmate, and here we have a game over. Okay, so wanted to mention that earlier position, right? If you see a stonewall type setup, no reason to freak out. Definitely no reason to start matching what they're doing. Play a move like c4, right? Gain some space. You can castle. Just play some solid chess. It's going to be hard for black to expand out of this pawn structure. For example, if they play a move like e5, because d5 and f5 are weaker, and if a move like c5, d5 is more exposed. So yeah, if black's going to take their time, we're going to take our time too. And if they don't take their time, we're going to take our time anyways. Next up, we have the following game, and I wanted to include this because, by the way, I can already hear people saying, "You didn't play the hippo." Okay? Here's the deal. Up to this point, we're playing a hippo structure, and yes, a full hippo is 2 fianchettoed bishops and 2 knights tucked. But there are times where we can get out of a full hippo. We can go into a half hippo or a pseudo hippo, and I don't do that often. But I've been looking at some different kind of ideas, and obviously, as I've mentioned way too many times on this channel, I reached the National Master title by playing nothing but the Hippopotamus Defense as white and black. Yeah, it's done well for me. I love the system. But I have been looking at some transpositional ideas. Like, what if I want to go into a neo-modern? What if I want to go into a Tigers modern? What if I want to go into a Pierce? What if I want to mix things up a little bit and play with some different ideas? Recently, right, and for this one, I'll just go back to the beginning, okay? I've been looking a lot at this position after bishop e3. I mean, this is a very aggressive setup. White often castling queenside, but also just throwing pawns down like crazy. Now, in the game here, I played the move of e6. I've been looking at e6, which is what I have been going with for a long time. a6 as well, a6 and knight d7. But okay, here I play a6, looking towards b5. White often stops this by playing a4. Now, when I see this move a4, one good option that we have, in this case, I play h6, I play knight e7, and here I continue with f5. Okay, striking on this side of the board. And notice now, because of a4, I play knight bc6. Okay, now we're getting out of regular hippo territory now, right? I mean, this side of the board looks like a hippo. This side does not. I mean, kind of does with d6 and a6, but not fully. The reason that we can play knight c6 after a4, by the way, if a4 wasn't played, I'm probably looking at knight d7, b5, knight b6 ideas. But since a4 was played, b5 just isn't possible right now, until they castle queenside, and then we can try to break things open. But until then, I mean, this just isn't going to work unless we want to lose our rook, which we don't. So I play knight c6. Now, if white plays d5, notice I can play knight e5. That works. I can also think about knight b4. This is an option because of a4. The knight cannot get kicked. It cannot get trapped now. If you want to take our pawn, we'll take back. If you want to take on f5, the knight captures back. If you want to castle queenside, we can play a move like queen d7. Black here with an overwhelming advantage. Two bishops pouncing down on the queen side. A knight on f5 that's very active. A knight on b4 that's doing a ton. At the moment, we're looking at bishop takes c3 ideas. And, you know, if we take that knight, this pawn on a4 is going to become exposed. You know, of course, we got to be careful about our rook as well. But even as black, I mean, I could see us castling queenside here and still having great attacking play. By the way, if something like b3, thinking that they can hold on to this pawn, we take the knight, and you did hold on to your pawn, but thanks for the queen. That's it. Okay, so I was just letting you guys know, I've been kind of, you know, looking at some different transpositional hippo ideas. Let me know down in the comment section below, like, when you play the hippo, are you going for that exact setup every time? Or have you been finding different setups from white that are a little bit problematic, and you've been kind of changing your approach to them? I'll give you guys a quick example, okay? We'll go back to this position. Against the move of f4, I don't recommend... Now, up to this point, I recommend it, but I don't recommend knight d7 here, going into a normal hippo, because f5, in a lot of instances, is just a headache, okay? What I recommend is playing 1, 2, and 3, and playing knight c6. And yes, I did have someone get mad at me telling me I didn't play the hippo. What else do I call this, guys? We have a hippo on this side of the board, c5, b6. The big difference is that we're playing knight c6. Putting pressure on that pawn on d4. Notice, once we do put the knight there, let's just say queen d2 or something, we have 1, 2, 3 pieces on this pawn. And notice, our bishop's staying put. We have 1, 2, 3 defending f5. So we have 3 defenders and 3 attackers. Obviously, a knight doesn't move like that. 3 attackers coming on to d4, black here, with a solid game. But going back, in the game here, we have knight c6. Knight h3 is played. I ended up playing e5, advancing in the center. d5 is played. No reason to play passive here. Let's throw our knight right in. If white captured, which they didn't, we can take back. Now their knight has to go somewhere. a6 is covered. All of these squares are taken from the knight. Let's say something like a2. I like the move c5, supporting that pawn. I mean, after taking, we could take towards the center. If not f4, rook b8. And yeah, notice the pawn can't move without running into d3. This bishop, very active, going for the rook. Keep in mind, again, when you're playing the hippo, those bishops have much more potential than your opponent is probably giving them credit for. And yeah, I mean, this position after rook b8, I'm a big modern defense fan, a big hippo fan, as y'all know. A lot of modern type positions I really like. So this is for me, this is a very fun position. But after knight d4, white does not do that. They play bishop d3, which is a much better move. In that case, I play c5 anyways, just trying to give this knight a little bit more support. And after capturing, let's take with the b pawn, take towards the center, keep this pawn structure intact and solid. Knight e2 is played, and I ended up taking the knight. I actually think that c5 is still a pretty good move. Now, it does weaken d5, but this knight on d4 is very hard for white to deal with. And we as black still have d5 breaks available in the future. So, you know, if something like c3, knight b3 forked, you can't get rid of the knight. If you do move the rook and then try to play c3, we still play knight b3. Your queen only has one square that's safe, and then we trap your bishop. So this is a very hard position for white to navigate through. And of course, if you take it after c5, right, let's say you take with the knight or something, we take with the c-pawn, d5. I mean, it just feels like black is on the attack here. Great attacking play. But instead, I played the move knight takes e2, played d5, still felt pretty good about this position, advancing in the center, taking up a ton of space. I played the move of d4, continued the bishop e6, castled kingside. Were all these moves perfect according to the engine? No, but I still think that this is a very playable position for black. I played king h7, just giving this pawn a little bit more support at the end of the day. But in all honesty, you know, I think king h7 could run into some h5 issues, right? Because now this pawn's attacked, and if we play g5, white can take, and we can't even take this bishop without running into knight takes g5. Right, so be careful about that. Obviously, this is a blitz game, so I don't have that much time to think about stuff. I think if I had time to do it again, I'd probably look at a move like taking on e4. If bishop takes e4, knight f5 playing actively. If pawn takes, preventing us from getting our knight there, okay, you prevented our knight from activating it, but your bishop isn't looking too great either. Yeah, I mean, we could play a move like knight c8. You could take our pawn all you want, but if you do that, we have some pretty crazy ideas here. Taking on h4 is a solid move, but the engine surprisingly has us taking on a6, then capturing on h4. Knight f2 is now not possible because the queen took. And after queen takes e4, so much activity here, so many threats, and white's only up 1 point in material. So that's one way to play it. But I played king h7, dropping the pawn. Did I see this? No. Right? I play c5, play knight c6, f4. I felt pretty good about this move because now this pawn on h4 is feeling a little bit by itself. If this pawn ever moves here or here, I have the option of taking or en passant. So it's going to be very hard for this pawn on h4 to get support. On top of that, the knight, because it's 2 squares diagonal, is 4 moves away from capturing or, you know, really moving to that square in the case of us capturing off that pawn. After rook g1, I could have captured on h4. I decided I kind of liked bishop f6 a little bit more, going with the bishop first. H5 is played. Guess g5 would just be a bad move here. Okay, I know in the Hippo we want things locked up, but this is a free pawn. And on top of that, if we push this pawn, it's going to be hard to win this guy because white's going to start, you know, playing something like rook h1, bishop c4. You see a pawn, just take it, right? I mean, we're really not worried about this stuff opening up. I mean, talk about locked up structure in the center. We're totally fine. g4 is played, white trying to break things open. Even then, I could take. I ended up playing bishop h4, and after pawn takes, I played rook g8. White does have a pawn here, so they are up 1 pawn, but I didn't feel too concerned about them having an extra pawn there. I mean, I felt pretty okay. I think the best option would have been bishop g3, kind of limiting that rook and still maintaining the pressure, but I go with rook g8. Here I play queen e7, knight g4 is played. Take a moment if you want to, look at this position, and just think to yourself, what would you play if you were black here? Okay, there's a couple of winning moves. One of them's winning, the other is crushing, and that crushing move here for black is c4. Now, I know I usually, you know, and really everyone, right? I mean, we can't just make, most of the time, unless we're talking about theory or something, we can't just make rules. Like, if you're up material, always trade. I talk about that all the time, but it's not always true, right? There's exceptions. If our opponent's castled queenside on the Hippo, right? And of course, in this one, we didn't play a full Hippo, but in the Hippo or even in a pseudo Hippo like this, I haven't seen an example yet of us not wanting to attack the castled king on the queen side. I mean, the Hippo is very well set up. The Modern is very well set up with that fianchetto bishop on g7 to put pressure on that queen side, and this is not an exception. I mean, in this case, the king is queenside. We have two open files where rooks can barrel down. The bishop's not on g7 anymore, but, you know, this is still a very nice attack. We play c4. By the way, the bishop's trapped. If you take with the pawn, we throw in a check. We throw in another check. White's about to lose. I mean, you only have one move here, and we're going to take with the rook, and that's ball game. In the game, we have bishop takes c4. Against that, I play queen a3. And here, rook takes a4, sacrificing the rook, trying to break this game open as much as I can. Obviously, I didn't have all the time in the world to calculate it because I only had 22 seconds when this move was done. But here's the thing. I'm threatening mate in 1. And if you take the rook, which is what white did, we get another rook in there. And just looking at this kind of position, there's just too much happening. White cannot hold on. Bishop b5 was played in the game. By the way, bishop b3, we can just snatch that guy off, barreling through the defenses, and we're going to have a mate the next move. But after bishop b5, we have 1 and 2, and this was a game over. Hope you enjoyed those games, in which case, yeah, all 5 were against international master players, in which case 4 of them I played the full Hippo, and one of them I played kind of a pseudo Hippo idea. You know, when we see white going with that 150 attack with a pawn on a4, I sometimes have, you know, recently have been thinking about switching up my approach a little bit. Let me know what you thought of the games down below. And again, as mentioned in the intro, for the rest of this month, you know, I'm giving out a 30% discount code for the Hippopotamus Defense course. Put a lot of work into it, over 6 hours in content. Hundreds have gotten it. Many have told me that they've enjoyed it and gotten a lot out of it. And I'm not trying to sell something I don't believe in. I mean, I've played the Hippo exclusively as white and black to reach the national master title, to beat an international master over the board, to beat a good number of IMs, as you just saw. And I'm not saying this to brag, and hopefully you can see in my videos, I'm not trying to act like I'm the best player ever. Every game I had mistakes. Multiple mistakes in every game, but that's how you get better, right? You got to know that you're not going to play perfectly, and you got to know that you still have room to grow. And if you think you got it all figured out, you don't. And I guess that could be a lot, kind of a life thing as well, right? Not just chess, but what I am saying is that I do think the Hippo works. And if you're a beginner player, right, the Hippo's not a magic ticket to becoming a GM or anything, but it is a great way to take your opponent out of their comfort zone. All the theory they know goes out the window. I don't care what they play. The Sicilian defense, Carl Khan. If it's white, they play the King's Indian attack. If they play e4 with the Danish, if they play d4 with the Jobava London, or whatever they're doing, it doesn't matter. When we play the Hippo, we're playing the Hippo. And then it's up to them what setup they want to take against it. And then once we hit that middle game, which is something I talk about a ton in the course, we have those 4 middle game attacking ideas. What do we do with it? That's really where the battle starts for us. What's up, y'all? Solomon here. I hope you enjoyed this video. I appreciate y'all a ton. And if you haven't subscribed before, you know, just a quick reminder, you know, to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and hit that bell as well. If you're wanting more content like this to help you improve in your game and all that kind of stuff. And real quickly as well, I wanted to give a quick shout out to my Patreon supporters for the month of June in 2024. I appreciate y'all a ton. You guys are helping me do this full time. And yeah, I mean, if you haven't checked it out before, I highly recommend that you go check out some of the benefits that you gain by becoming a member. And I will see y'all in the next one. Peace.